Before we start, just a quick reminder to hit that subscribe button. Only 2% are subscribers. At 1,000 subscribers, I'll be posting a special video. The dense canopy of the alien jungle cast long, eerie shadows as Corporal Jake Anderson navigated through the underbrush. Each step was a careful calculation, avoiding the roots and vines that threatened to trip him. His helmet-mounted flashlight flickered intermittently, creating an unsettling dance of light and darkness. The mission parameters were clear: investigate the source of an unknown distress signal. However, clarity did little to prepare him for what awaited. Jake pushed through a thick wall of foliage and stumbled into a clearing. His breath caught as he saw the downed alien spacecraft, its once sleek surface now marred by burns and jagged tears. The craft's design was unlike anything he had seen before, with smooth curves and organic lines that seemed almost alive. He approached cautiously, his rifle raised and eyes scanning for any signs of movement. Near the wreckage, he spotted it. A creature, large and imposing, with an aura of both strength and vulnerability. Its skin was a mottled blend of deep blues and purples, and its eyes, though fierce, held a trace of desperation. The creature was clearly injured, struggling to move as it lay partially pinned under a piece of the ship's hull. "Easy now," Jake murmured, lowering his rifle slightly but keeping it at the ready. His training had instilled a healthy dose of caution, yet something in the creature's eyes spoke to him. It wasn't an adversary. It was a being in need. He slowly advanced, making sure his movements were non-threatening. The creature growled, a low, rumbling sound that resonated in Jake's chest. He raised a hand in what he hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said softly, though he doubted the creature understood his words. To his surprise, the creature's growl lessened, its eyes locked onto his. Taking it as a sign, Jake holstered his weapon and reached into his pack for a medkit. The alien watched him warily, its breathing ragged. Jake carefully approached and knelt beside it, opening the kit and showing the creature its contents. "I'm going to help," he explained, hoping the tone of his voice would convey his intent. The creature winced as Jake began to work, applying antiseptic to its wounds and using a portable scanner to assess the extent of the damage. It seemed to understand, or at least tolerate, his ministrations. As he worked, Jake couldn't help but marvel at the creature's physiology. It was both familiar and entirely alien. The process was slow and painstaking, but eventually Jake managed to stabilize the creature. He stepped back, giving it space to breathe. The creature's eyes followed him, a mix of gratitude and curiosity evident in its gaze. Jake sat down a few feet away, taking a moment to assess their situation. They were deep in the jungle, far from any human outpost, with no immediate way to call for backup. It was just him and the alien, stranded together. Days turned into a week as Jake and the creature, which he decided to call Kraar, began to develop a rudimentary form of communication. Gestures and facial expressions became their language, each learning to understand the other's intent. Kraar, it seemed, was not just a survivor, but a warrior, and the crash had left it far from its home and people. One evening, as they sat by a small fire, Kraar made a series of complex gestures, pointing to the stars, and then to a symbol carved into a piece of metal from the wreck. Jake watched intently, piecing together the narrative. It seemed Kraar's ship had been attacked, forcing it to crash land on this planet. The attackers were relentless, hunting down any survivors. Jake's mind raced. "So you're being hunted," he said, more to himself than to Kraar. The alien's eyes met his, and there was a moment of mutual understanding. They were both soldiers, both fighting for survival in an unforgiving world. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. Jake taught Kraar basic survival skills tailored to the jungle's unique dangers, while Kraar shared knowledge of the alien technology salvaged from the wreckage. They became an effective team, their differences blending into a synergy that kept them both alive. One night, as they prepared to rest, the jungle erupted with the sounds of pursuit. Kraar's reaction was immediate, its eyes widening in recognition and fear. It gestured urgently for Jake to follow, and they quickly gathered their belongings. The hunters had found them, and their intent was clear. They moved swiftly through the dense forest, Kraar leading the way with an innate sense of direction. The sounds of their pursuers grew closer, a cacophony of alien roars and mechanical whirs. Jake's heart pounded in his chest, adrenaline sharpening his senses. They had to find a place to make a stand. Just as the hunters closed in, Kraar led Jake to an ancient structure hidden among the trees. The ruins were a relic of a long-lost civilization, their stone walls etched with intricate carvings. Kraar activated a hidden mechanism, and the entrance sealed behind them, providing a temporary respite. Inside, the air was cool and still, a stark contrast to the chaos outside. Jake and Kraar took a moment to catch their breath, the weight of their situation settling in. They were cornered, but not defeated. Together they would find a way to survive. As Jake examined the carvings on the walls, he realized they depicted a story, a tale of alliances and battles fought side by side. It was a reminder that unity could overcome even the greatest of odds. With Kraar by his side, he knew they stood a fighting chance. The first rays of dawn filtered through the canopy, casting dappled shadows on the ancient stone walls of the ruins. Jake awoke to the soft hum of the jungle, the memory of the night's chase still fresh in his mind. Kraar was already awake, its sharp eyes scanning their surroundings. Despite the temporary safety of the ruins, the tension between them was palpable. They were allies by necessity, but trust was still a fragile thread. Jake stretched, wincing at the stiffness in his muscles. He glanced at Kraar, who was examining the carvings on the walls with a focused intensity. The intricate symbols told stories of battles and alliances, hinting at a deeper history between their peoples. Jake approached, hoping to glean some insight from the alien's reaction. Kraar turned to him, eyes gleaming with an unspoken thought. It gestured to a particular carving, a scene depicting two figures, one clearly of Kraar's species, and the other vaguely human-like, standing together against a common enemy. Jake nodded slowly, understanding the implication. "You think we can be like them?" he asked, pointing to the figures. Kraar's nod was solemn. There was a mutual understanding that their survival depended on their ability to work together. The ruins provided a brief respite, but they needed to formulate a plan. Their enemies were relentless, and hiding would only delay the inevitable. As they prepared to leave the safety of the ruins, Jake and Kraar scavenged for anything that could be of use. They found remnants of ancient tools and weapons, relics of a bygone era. Jake fashioned a crude spear, while Kraar repurposed some of the alien technology from the wreckage into makeshift devices. Each step brought them closer to becoming a cohesive unit. The day was spent in relative quiet, both of them on high alert as they moved through the dense jungle. They communicated through gestures and expressions, their bond growing stronger with each passing hour. Jake found himself marveling at Kraar's resilience and strength, while Kraar seemed equally impressed by Jake's ingenuity and determination. As night fell, they set up camp in a small clearing, the firelight casting flickering shadows on their faces. The jungle's nocturnal sounds provided a backdrop to their silent companionship. Jake took a moment to clean his rifle, the familiar routine calming his nerves. Kraar watched him, its eyes reflecting the firelight. They shared a meager meal, the silence between them comfortable now. Jake broke it first. "We need to find a way to contact my people," he said, more to himself than to Kraar. "They can help us." Kraar nodded, understanding the importance of Jake's words. It pointed to the sky, then to a small device it had salvaged from the wreck. Jake recognized it as a communication module, damaged but possibly repairable. With a grunt of effort, he set to work, using the tools they had gathered to fix the device. Kraar assisted, its knowledge of the technology proving invaluable. Hours passed in focused silence, and finally the device crackled to life. A burst of static filled the air, followed by a faint signal. Jake's heart leapt. "This is Corporal Jake Anderson, United Earth Forces. Do you copy?" The response was garbled but unmistakable. "Anderson, this is Command. We read you. What's your status?" Jake glanced at Kraar, a smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. "I'm not alone out here," he said, "and I need immediate extraction." The plan was set in motion. Command would send a rescue team, but it would take time. Until then, Jake and Kraar needed to hold their position and fend off any further attacks. The next days were spent fortifying their camp, setting traps and preparing for the inevitable confrontation. One evening, as they patrolled the perimeter, Kraar suddenly stopped, its body tensing. Jake followed its gaze and saw movement in the underbrush. The hunters had found them again. The duo sprang into action, their movements synchronized from days of working together. The first wave of attackers was met with a barrage of traps and makeshift weapons. Jake and Kraar fought side by side, their bond evident in the fluidity of their teamwork. The hunters were relentless, but the combined strength and cunning of the human and alien proved formidable. Despite their efforts, the attackers kept coming. Jake's rifle blazed, and Kraar's claws slashed through the night air. They fought with a ferocity born of desperation, each knowing that the other was their only chance at survival. The battle was long and grueling, but finally the last of the hunters fell. Jake and Kraar stood panting, their bodies covered in grime and blood. The jungle fell silent once more, the threat temporarily abated. As they tended to their wounds and assessed the damage, Jake couldn't help but feel a deep sense of respect for his alien companion. Kraar's bravery and strength had saved them both, and in that moment, any lingering mistrust melted away. They were no longer just uneasy allies, they were comrades in arms, bound by a shared struggle and a common goal. They settled in for the night, exhausted but resolute. The stars above were a silent reminder of the vastness of the universe and the unlikely bond that had formed between them. Jake glanced at Kraar, who was already dozing off, its body relaxed for the first time in days. "Thank you," Jake whispered, more to himself than to the sleeping alien. The journey ahead would be fraught with danger, but for the first time since crash landing on this alien world, he felt a glimmer of hope. Together, they would survive. Together they would find a way home. The night was darker than usual, the moon hidden behind thick clouds, casting an ominous gloom over the jungle. Jake's senses were on high alert as he and Kraar moved stealthily through the undergrowth. The recent battle had taken its toll, but the knowledge that Command was sending a rescue team fueled their determination to survive. They had spent the last few days fortifying their position and preparing for the inevitable arrival of more hunters. Despite their best efforts, Jake knew that their defenses were only temporary measures. The hunters were relentless, driven by an unknown motive that made them a constant threat. The jungle, with its labyrinth of trees and dense foliage, was both an ally and an enemy. Jake and Kraar's silent communication had evolved, their bond growing stronger with each passing day. They had developed a seamless way of working together, their actions perfectly synchronized. Jake had come to rely on Kraar's keen senses and unparalleled strength, while Kraar trusted Jake's strategic mind and resourcefulness. As they navigated through the jungle, Kraar suddenly halted, raising a hand to signal Jake to stop. Jake froze, listening intently. At first he heard nothing but the usual symphony of nocturnal creatures. Then a faint rustling sound reached his ears, distinct and deliberate. The hunters were close. Jake motioned for Kraar to follow him to a nearby vantage point. They climbed a tall tree, carefully positioning themselves among the thick branches. From their elevated perch, they could see the hunters moving below, their figures barely visible in the dim light. There were more of them this time, moving with a predatory grace that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. "We need to be smart about this," Jake whispered, his voice barely audible. Kraar nodded in agreement, its eyes narrowing with focus. They had set up traps around the perimeter, but Jake knew that the element of surprise would be their greatest advantage. The hunters moved closer, unaware of the ambush waiting for them. Jake waited until they were within the kill zone before giving the signal. A low, guttural sound from Kraar was all it took. The first trap sprung with a violent snap, sending a shower of spikes into the advancing group. Cries of pain and confusion filled the air as the hunters stumbled into the remaining traps. Jake and Kraar leapt from their perch, attacking with a ferocity born of desperation. Jake's rifle spat fire, each shot carefully aimed to maximize damage. Kraar's claws flashed in the darkness, cutting down any hunter that got too close. The element of surprise worked in their favor, but the hunters were quick to regroup. As the battle raged on, Jake noticed a figure that stood apart from the rest. The hunter leader, distinguished by its elaborate armor and commanding presence, directed the others with a series of sharp gestures. Jake knew that taking out the leader would be crucial to breaking their resolve. "Cover me!" Jake shouted to Kraar, who immediately shifted its focus to provide support. Jake charged towards the leader, dodging and weaving through the melee. The leader saw him coming and met his charge with a powerful blow that knocked Jake to the ground. Stars exploded in his vision, but he forced himself to roll away, narrowly avoiding a follow-up strike. Kraar intercepted the leader, engaging it in a brutal clash of strength and skill. Jake used the opportunity to catch his breath and assess the situation. The hunters were relentless, but their coordination faltered without clear commands. He knew they had to end this quickly. With a renewed surge of energy, Jake lunged at the leader, aiming for a vulnerable spot in its armor. The leader roared in pain, its attention momentarily diverted. Kraar seized the opening, delivering a devastating blow that sent the leader crashing to the ground. The remaining hunters hesitated, their morale shattered by the fall of their leader. Jake and Kraar pressed their advantage, driving the hunters back into the jungle. The few that survived fled, their roars of retreat echoing through the trees. The silence that followed was almost deafening. Jake and Kraar stood panting, their bodies bruised and bloodied, but victorious. The jungle once again fell into an uneasy calm. Jake approached the fallen leader, examining its armor and weapons. There were no clear insignias or markings that explained their relentless pursuit. It only deepened the mystery of why they were being hunted. "Why won't they just leave us alone?" Jake muttered, frustration evident in his voice. Kraar placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder, a silent promise that they would find the answers together. As they made their way back to their fortified camp, the gravity of their situation weighed heavily on Jake. The battle had been won, but the war was far from over. They needed to find a way to signal the rescue team and ensure their extraction before more hunters arrived. That night, as they tended to their wounds by the fire, Jake couldn't help but reflect on how much had changed since his arrival. Kraar was no longer just an alien creature. It was a trusted ally, a friend. They were bound by their shared struggle, and together they had become a force to be reckoned with. The jungle's sounds lulled them into an uneasy sleep, but Jake's mind remained alert. He knew that more challenges awaited them, but for the first time he felt a sense of hope. They had faced the hunters and emerged victorious. With Kraar by his side, he believed they could overcome whatever came next. As the first light of dawn broke through the canopy, Jake and Kraar prepared for the day ahead. They would continue to fight, to survive, and to uncover the truth behind the relentless pursuit. Together, they would find a way home. The jungle was deceptively quiet as Jake and Kraar made their way back to the ancient ruins that had become their temporary refuge. The air was thick with the scent of damp earth and foliage, a stark contrast to the sterile environment of Jake's usual military surroundings. The recent battles had left them both weary, but there was no time to rest. They needed answers, and the ruins seemed to hold the key. Upon reaching the ruins, they took a moment to catch their breath. The stone structure stood as a silent sentinel, its walls etched with carvings that hinted at a lost civilization. Jake had always been fascinated by history, and now, standing before these ancient symbols, he felt a sense of awe mixed with urgency. Kraar moved towards a particular section of the wall, its eyes scanning the carvings with a focused intensity. Jake followed, curious about what had captured his companion's attention. The carvings depicted scenes of conflict and cooperation, of battles fought and alliances forged. One panel in particular showed figures that resembled both Kraar's species and humans, standing together against a common enemy. Jake pointed to the panel. "Is this what you wanted to show me?" he asked. Kraar nodded, its expression grave. There was something about this alliance, this unity depicted in the carvings, that was significant. Jake studied the images, trying to decipher their meaning. The ancient symbols were unfamiliar, but the story they told was clear: survival through cooperation. As they delved deeper into the ruins, they discovered a chamber filled with artifacts. The air was cooler here, and the walls were lined with shelves that held a variety of items, weapons, tools, and objects that defied immediate identification. Jake's eyes were drawn to a pedestal in the center of the room, where a large ornate device rested. Kraar approached the device, its movements reverent. It touched the device gently, and a soft hum filled the chamber. The carvings on the walls began to glow with a faint blue light, illuminating the room with an otherworldly glow. Jake watched in awe as the device came to life, projecting a holographic map of the surrounding area. The map detailed the jungle, the crash site, and various points of interest, including what appeared to be other ancient structures. Kraar gestured to the map, pointing to a location marked with a distinct symbol. Jake recognized it as a place they had seen during their travels, a site they had avoided due to its dangerous terrain. "What's there?" Jake asked, tracing the symbol with his finger. Kraar responded with a series of gestures, indicating that the location was of great importance. It seemed to be a central hub, possibly the heart of the ancient civilization that had built these ruins. There, they might find more information about the hunters and the reason for their relentless pursuit. The device also projected a series of symbols that Kraar began to interpret. From what Jake could gather, the hunters were part of an ancient order, a group that sought to eliminate any remnants of this long-lost alliance. The ruins held secrets that the hunters feared, secrets that could turn the tide in Jake and Kraar's favor. Jake and Kraar spent hours studying the map and the information it provided. The more they learned, the clearer their path became. They needed to reach the central hub, to uncover the truth behind the hunters and their mission. It was a risky venture, but the alternative, waiting for the hunters to find them again, was not an option. As they prepared to leave, Jake took one last look at the chamber. The ancient artifacts, the glowing carvings, and the holographic map all spoke of a time when unity and cooperation had been paramount. It was a powerful reminder of the strength they could find in their unlikely alliance. With newfound determination, they set out towards the central hub, navigating through the dense jungle with the map as their guide. The terrain was treacherous, but their shared purpose kept them focused. They moved swiftly and silently, ever aware of the dangers that lurked in the shadows. Days passed in a blur of cautious travel and brief skirmishes with the jungle's native predators. The bond between Jake and Kraar grew stronger, their movements and decisions increasingly synchronized. They had become a formidable team, each compensating for the other's weaknesses and enhancing their strengths. As they neared their destination, the landscape began to change. The jungle gave way to a clearing dominated by an imposing structure, even larger and more ornate than the ruins they had left behind. The air was charged with an almost tangible energy, a sense of history and power that sent a shiver down Jake's spine. They approached the entrance cautiously, their eyes scanning for any signs of traps or ambushes. The hunters would not easily relinquish whatever secrets lay within these walls. With weapons at the ready, they stepped inside, the darkness swallowing them whole. The interior was vast and echoing, the walls lined with more glowing carvings and ancient machinery. The air was cool and dry, a stark contrast to the humid jungle outside. As they moved deeper into the structure, they came across a central chamber, dominated by a massive, intricately carved stone altar. Kraar approached the altar, its eyes reflecting a mix of awe and determination. Jake followed, his heart pounding in anticipation. This was it, the heart of the ancient civilization, the place where they would find the answers they sought. As Kraar activated the altar, a series of holographic images sprang to life, depicting a detailed history of the ancient alliance and the rise of the hunters. Jake watched in fascination as the story unfolded, a tale of cooperation between species, of shared knowledge and mutual respect. But it also told of betrayal and the emergence of the hunters, a faction determined to erase all traces of this unity. The images showed the hunters' relentless pursuit of any remnants of the alliance, their brutal efficiency in eradicating those who dared to remember. It was a chilling revelation, but it also provided a glimmer of hope. The ancient civilization had left behind powerful tools and knowledge hidden within these ruins that could help Jake and Kraar turn the tide. As the holographic images faded, Jake and Kraar exchanged a look of determination. They had the information they needed, and with it, a renewed sense of purpose. The hunters might be relentless, but they were not invincible. Together, they would use the knowledge of the ancients to fight back, to protect their fragile alliance and secure their future. With a silent vow, they left the central chamber, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The jungle outside seemed less foreboding now, the path ahead clearer than ever. Jake and Kraar moved with a newfound confidence, their bond unbreakable. They were no longer just survivors, they were warriors, united in their quest for freedom and justice. The journey back to their fortified camp was marked by a tense silence. Both Jake and Kraar were lost in their thoughts, processing the revelations from the ancient ruins. The knowledge they had gained was a double-edged sword. It offered hope, but also painted a grim picture of the hunters' relentless mission. The weight of this responsibility pressed heavily on Jake's shoulders as he navigated through the dense jungle, his senses on high alert for any signs of their enemies. When they finally reached their camp, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the clearing. They set to work immediately, reinforcing their defenses and setting up additional traps. Every moment was precious, and they knew that the hunters would not give them much time. The knowledge of the ancients had given them an edge, but they needed to be prepared for the inevitable confrontation. As night fell, the camp was transformed into a fortress. Jake and Kraar worked seamlessly, their bond now a well-honed partnership. Jake couldn't help but marvel at how far they had come, from strangers who couldn't understand each other to comrades united in a common cause. He glanced at Kraar, who was adjusting a trap with meticulous care. "We've got this," Jake said, more to reassure himself than anything. Kraar looked up, meeting Jake's gaze with a determined nod. The alien's eyes conveyed a message that transcended language. They would fight, and they would win. The night was still and quiet, the jungle seemingly holding its breath in anticipation. Jake and Kraar took turns keeping watch, their senses attuned to every rustle and whisper. The calm before the storm was almost unnerving, and Jake's mind raced with strategies and contingencies. They had set up a perimeter of traps and fortifications, but he knew that their true strength lay in their unity and resolve. As dawn began to break, the first signs of the hunters' approach became evident. A distant rhythmic thumping, the unmistakable sound of their heavy footfalls, grew steadily louder. Jake signaled to Kraar, and they took their positions, ready to spring into action. The hunters emerged from the jungle, their armored forms glinting in the early light. They moved with precision, a deadly force intent on their target. The first trap triggered with a violent snap, sending a barrage of spikes into the advancing group. Cries of pain and confusion erupted, but the hunters pressed on, undeterred. Jake and Kraar opened fire, their attacks coordinated and relentless. The hunters' superior technology was matched by the duo's cunning and determination. The battle was fierce and chaotic. Jake's rifle blazed, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Beside him, Kraar moved with fluid grace, its claws and makeshift weapons a blur of lethal efficiency. They fought as one, their bond tested and proven in the crucible of combat. Despite their best efforts, the hunters' sheer numbers began to take their toll. The traps slowed them down, but more and more poured into the clearing, their relentless advance threatening to overwhelm Jake and Kraar. The air was thick with the sounds of battle gunfire, roars, and the clash of metal on metal. In the midst of the chaos, Jake spotted the leader of the hunters, its armor distinct and its presence commanding. He knew that taking down the leader would be crucial to breaking the enemy's morale. With a quick signal to Kraar, they launched a coordinated assault, pushing through the ranks of hunters with a renewed sense of urgency. The leader was a formidable opponent, its movements swift and precise. Jake and Kraar attacked from different angles, their strikes calculated to exploit any weakness. The leader parried and countered with brutal efficiency, but the combined assault began to take its toll. A well-placed shot from Jake's rifle cracked the leader's helmet, exposing its face. Kraar seized the opportunity, delivering a powerful blow that sent the leader sprawling. The hunters hesitated, their resolve faltering at the sight of their fallen leader. Jake and Kraar pressed their advantage, driving the remaining hunters back with a relentless onslaught. One by one the hunters fell, their retreat turning into a rout. The clearing was soon littered with the bodies of the fallen, the air thick with the acrid smell of gunpowder and ozone. As the last of the hunters fled into the jungle, Jake and Kraar stood victorious. The camp was a mess, the aftermath of the battle evident in the wreckage and debris, but they had won, and the cost had been worth it. They had defended their position and sent a clear message to their enemies. Exhausted but triumphant, they tended to their wounds and assessed the damage. The battle had been grueling, but it had also solidified their bond. Jake looked at Kraar, who was meticulously cleaning its claws. "We did it," he said, a tired smile spreading across his face. Kraar looked up, its eyes reflecting a mix of relief and pride. The alien nodded, a silent acknowledgement of their shared victory. With the immediate threat neutralized, they turned their attention to the next step. The knowledge they had gained from the ruins held the key to their ultimate goal, understanding and defeating the hunters once and for all. They knew that more battles lay ahead, but they were ready. As they prepared to move out, Jake activated the communication device they had salvaged from the wreckage. The faint signal connected, and he relayed their status to command. "This is Corporal Jake Anderson. We've engaged the enemy and secured our position, requesting immediate extraction and support." The response was swift. "Roger that, Anderson. Extraction team is en route. Hold your position." Jake closed the connection and looked at Kraar. "Help is on the way," he said, "but we need to stay vigilant." Kraar nodded, its eyes scanning the jungle for any signs of movement. They had won this battle, but the war was far from over. With their alliance stronger than ever, they were ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they would uncover the secrets of the hunters and ensure their survival. As the first rays of sunlight broke through the canopy, Jake and Kraar stood side by side, ready to face the future. Their journey was far from over, but with each other, they were unstoppable. The bond they had forged in the fires of combat would guide them through the trials to come, and together they would prevail. The dawn sky was tinged with hues of orange and pink as the first light of morning filtered through the jungle canopy. Jake and Kraar, battle-worn but resolute, took a moment to catch their breath. The jungle seemed to hold its breath with them, the usual cacophony of sounds muted in the aftermath of the fierce battle. The message sent to command had been received, and reinforcements were on their way. Until then, they needed to remain vigilant. As the sun rose higher, they moved around the camp, assessing the damage and reinforcing their defenses. The sense of urgency was palpable. They knew that the hunters, though temporarily driven back, would not remain at bay for long. Their enemies were relentless, driven by a purpose that Jake and Kraar had only just begun to understand. Jake checked his rifle, ensuring it was fully loaded and in working order. His movements were methodical, a stark contrast to the whirlwind of thoughts racing through his mind. The battle had taken a toll on both of them, but it had also solidified their determination to see this through to the end. Kraar was equally focused, its eyes scanning the tree line for any signs of movement. Despite the calm, Jake could see the tension in his companion's posture. They were both acutely aware that the next wave could come at any moment. As midday approached, the jungle erupted with the sounds of approaching hunters. The ground seemed to tremble under the weight of their advance. Jake and Kraar took their positions, ready to face whatever came their way. The traps were set, and their weapons were primed. All that remained was to stand their ground. The hunters emerged from the trees, their numbers overwhelming. This time there was no element of surprise, no chance to catch them off guard. The leader, a towering figure with a scarred visage and a menacing presence, led the charge. Jake's heart pounded in his chest as he took aim, his finger hovering over the trigger. "Here we go," he muttered, more to himself than to Kraar. The battle commenced with a deafening roar. Jake and Kraar fought with a ferocity born of desperation, their movements synchronized and precise. The hunters were relentless, but the duo's resolve was unbreakable. Despite their best efforts, the sheer number of hunters began to wear them down. Jake's muscles burned with exhaustion, and his ammunition was running low. Kraar, too, was showing signs of fatigue, its movement slowing as the battle dragged on. They were being pushed back, inch by agonizing inch. Just as hope seemed to be slipping away, a roar echoed through the jungle. But this time it was not the hunters. Reinforcements had arrived. A squadron of heavily armed soldiers, humans and aliens alike, burst onto the scene, their weapons blazing. The tide of the battle shifted as the reinforcements engaged the hunters, their superior firepower and numbers overwhelming the enemy. Jake and Kraar fought their way to the center of the clearing, where the leader of the hunters stood. It was clear that this final confrontation would determine the outcome of the battle. The leader's eyes burned with hatred as it faced them, its weapon raised. In the ensuing chaos, Jake and Kraar coordinated their attacks, each movement calculated to exploit the leader's weaknesses. The leader fought back with savage intensity, but it was clear that it was outmatched. Just as victory seemed within reach, the leader lashed out with a brutal strike, knocking Jake to the ground. Pain exploded through Jake's body as he hit the dirt, his vision blurring. He struggled to rise, but his strength was failing. Kraar roared in defiance, stepping between Jake and the hunter leader. The two titans clashed, their battle a whirlwind of claws and steel. With a final desperate surge of energy, Kraar delivered a powerful blow that sent the leader reeling. It was a fleeting victory, as the leader, in its dying moments, thrust its weapon towards Jake. Time seemed to slow as the weapon descended, and Jake knew he couldn't evade it. But Kraar was faster. With a guttural roar, it threw itself in front of Jake, taking the full force of the blow. The leader's weapon pierced Kraar's chest, and the alien collapsed to the ground. The leader fell soon after, its life extinguished. "Kraar!" Jake screamed, crawling to his fallen friend. The pain in his own body was nothing compared to the agony of seeing Kraar injured. He cradled Kraar's head, tears blurring his vision. "Stay with me, buddy. Help is here." Kraar's eyes met his, filled with pain but also a sense of peace. It reached up, placing a hand on Jake's shoulder. There were no words, but the message was clear. Kraar had protected him, and it had been an honor to fight by his side. The reinforcements quickly secured the area, driving the remaining hunters into a full retreat. Medics rushed to Jake and Kraar's side, working swiftly to stabilize them both. Jake watched, his heart heavy, as they did everything they could to save his friend. Hours later, as the medics continued their efforts, the commander of the reinforcements approached Jake. "You both fought bravely," he said, his voice filled with respect. "We owe you our thanks. The hunters have been driven back, but we need to get you both to a medical facility immediately." Jake nodded, his eyes never leaving Kraar. "We're a team," he said softly. "We did this together." The evacuation was swift, and before long they were on a transport heading to a secure base. Jake sat beside Kraar, holding his friend's hand. The journey was a blur, his thoughts consumed by the battle and the sacrifice that had been made. At the medical facility, the doctors worked tirelessly to save Kraar. Jake, despite his own injuries, refused to leave his friend's side. He watched as they fought to stabilize Kraar, his heart aching with every passing moment. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, one of the doctors approached him. "He's stable," she said, a tired smile on her face. "It was touch and go, but he'll make it." Relief washed over Jake, and he slumped back in his chair. "Thank you," he whispered, tears of gratitude in his eyes. As the days passed, Jake and Kraar began to recover. Their bond, forged in the fires of battle, had only grown stronger. They had faced the hunters and emerged victorious, their unity a testament to the strength of their alliance. One evening, as they sat together in the recovery room, Jake looked at Kraar. "We did it," he said, a smile spreading across his face. "We beat them." Kraar nodded, its eyes reflecting the same sense of accomplishment. They had won a significant battle, but they both knew that the fight was far from over. The hunters would not stop, and there were still many questions left unanswered. But for now, they allowed themselves a moment of peace. Together, they had faced insurmountable odds and triumphed. Their journey was far from over, but with each other, they were ready to face whatever came next. As the sun set outside the window, casting a warm glow over the room, Jake and Kraar shared a quiet moment of reflection. They had sacrificed much, but they had also gained something invaluable, a friendship that transcended species and a shared determination to protect their newfound alliance. With a renewed sense of purpose, they looked towards the future, ready to continue their fight. Together, they were unstoppable. The days following the intense battle passed in a blur of recovery and strategic planning. Jake and Kraar's wounds slowly healed under the meticulous care of the medical team. The base buzzed with activity, a stark contrast to the quiet solitude of the jungle. Reinforcements continued to arrive, bringing with them supplies and advanced weaponry, bolstering their defenses against any future hunter incursions. Jake spent his days in a whirlwind of debriefings and strategy sessions, but his nights were often restless. The weight of recent events pressed heavily on his mind. The knowledge they had uncovered from the ruins and the bond he had forged with Kraar gave him hope. But he knew their fight was far from over. The hunters were relentless, and the ancient knowledge they had uncovered indicated that more challenges lay ahead. Kraar too was adjusting to life at the base. The alien's presence was initially met with curiosity and apprehension by the other soldiers, but Kraar's bravery and camaraderie soon won them over. It wasn't long before Kraar became a respected member of their unit, its skills and knowledge invaluable in their ongoing struggle. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a golden glow over the base, Jake and Kraar found themselves alone in a quiet corner of the compound. The air was filled with the sounds of the jungle, a constant reminder of the world just beyond their fortified walls. Jake leaned against a railing, gazing out at the horizon. "We've come a long way," he said, his voice thoughtful, "but I can't shake the feeling that this is just the beginning." Kraar stood beside him, its eyes reflecting the same sense of contemplation. The alien gestured towards the horizon, where the distant ruins of the ancient civilization lay hidden within the jungle. There was still much they didn't understand about the hunters and their relentless pursuit. As they stood in silence, the communicator on Jake's belt crackled to life. "Anderson, report to the command center. We've received new intelligence." Jake exchanged a glance with Kraar, a shared understanding passing between them. Whatever lay ahead, they would face it together. They made their way to the command center, the bustling activity around them a stark reminder of the ongoing war. Inside the command center, the atmosphere was charged with anticipation. The large holographic display in the center of the room flickered to life, revealing a detailed map of the region. Markings indicated the locations of known hunter bases and areas of recent activity. Colonel Harkins, the commanding officer, turned to address the assembled group. "We've intercepted communications from the hunters," he began, his tone grave. "They're regrouping and planning a major offensive. We need to strike first." The room buzzed with tension. Jake stepped forward, his eyes fixed on the map. "We have the knowledge from the ruins," he said, his voice steady. "We know their weaknesses and their tactics. We can use that to our advantage." Kraar nodded in agreement, its expression resolute. The ancient knowledge they had uncovered held the key to turning the tide of the battle. The information about the hunters' origins, their motivations, and their vulnerabilities was now their greatest weapon. The following days were a flurry of preparations. Jake and Kraar worked tirelessly with the other soldiers, devising a plan to strike at the heart of the hunters' operations. They trained together, honing their skills and strengthening their bond. The base was a hive of activity, everyone united by a common goal. On the eve of their mission, Jake and Kraar found a moment of quiet. They sat by the edge of the camp, the stars twinkling above them. Jake looked at Kraar, a sense of gratitude and respect filling his heart. "I couldn't have done this without you," he said softly. Kraar placed a hand on Jake's shoulder, its eyes conveying a depth of emotion that transcended words. Their journey had been filled with challenges, but it had also forged an unbreakable bond between them. The next morning they set out at dawn. The jungle was still and quiet, the tension palpable. The path ahead was fraught with danger, but they moved with purpose, their minds focused on the task at hand. The knowledge they had gained from the ruins guided their steps, each movement calculated and precise. As they approached the hunter's base, the air grew thick with anticipation. The plan was simple, but daring. Infiltrate the base, disrupt their operations, and strike a blow that would cripple the hunters' ability to wage war. Jake and Kraar led the way, their presence a beacon of hope for the soldiers following them. The initial assault was swift and brutal. The element of surprise worked in their favor, and the hunters were caught off guard. Jake's rifle blazed, each shot finding its mark with deadly accuracy. Kraar moved with lethal grace, its claws and makeshift weapons a blur of motion. The hunters, though formidable, were no match for the combined strength and strategy of Jake and Kraar's team. The ancient knowledge had given them the upper hand, revealing the hunters' weaknesses and allowing them to exploit every vulnerability. As the battle raged on, Jake found himself face to face with the new leader of the hunters. This figure was even more imposing than the last, its armor adorned with symbols of power and authority. The confrontation was inevitable, a final test of their resolve. The leader moved with terrifying speed, its attacks powerful and precise. Jake and Kraar fought side by side, their coordination flawless. The leader's strikes were relentless, but they held their ground, each attack met with equal force. In a desperate maneuver, the leader lunged at Jake, its weapon aimed for a killing blow. Time seemed to slow as the attack descended, but Jake was ready. He sidestepped the strike, countering with a precise shot that pierced the leader's armor. The leader staggered, a look of shock and disbelief in its eyes. Kraar seized the moment, delivering a devastating blow that ended the fight. The leader crumpled to the ground, its reign of terror brought to a swift and decisive end. The remaining hunters, seeing their leader fall, retreated in disarray. The battle was won, the hunters' base in ruins. Jake and Kraar stood victorious, their bond stronger than ever. As the dust settled, the reinforcements secured the area, and the immediate threat was neutralized. Jake and Kraar took a moment to reflect on their journey. They had faced incredible odds and emerged triumphant, their alliance a testament to the power of unity and cooperation. The mission had been a success, but their work was far from over. The knowledge they had uncovered from the ruins would continue to guide them, helping them to rebuild and strengthen their defenses against any future threats. As they made their way back to the base, the sun began to rise, casting a golden light over the jungle. It was a new beginning, a chance to build a future founded on the lessons of the past. Jake and Kraar walked side by side, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Together, they had forged an unbreakable bond, and with it, they would continue to protect their world and their people. The journey had been long and difficult, but it had also been a journey of growth, understanding, and triumph. And with each step, they moved forward with the knowledge that together they were unstoppable.